Let's now look at the fixed income market. So fixed income, as the name suggests, it provides a fixed return. So the best examples of fixed income instruments are bonds and certificates of deposit, which is also a CD. So many people may have had experience with a CD. You go to a bank, you give them $5,000 and they'll give you 2% interest, and the CD is for 6 months. And after 6 months, you have the option of either renewing it or cashing it in, and you get your 2% interest as well. So it's no different from bonds. So bonds are also the same. The bond issuer issues a certain bond at a certain interest, and then investors who want to pick up those bonds, they will buy those bonds and they'll receive interest as per the terms of the bond, and at the end of the period the investor can cash in their principal. So in general, your principal is deemed to be protected. However, it also depends on the credit rating of the bond issuer. So obviously government bonds are deemed to be the least risky, and even among governments, the US government is known as the risk-free rate because there is nothing that is less riskier than US government bonds. So the US government bonds will pay the least amount of interest. And then perhaps the UK government will be next, which will pay a slightly higher interest. Switzerland might pay a slightly higher interest. And then you have the corporate bonds. And even among corporate bonds, there's various hierarchies. Microsoft and Intel might be highly rated. And in fact, Apple is actually coming out with a bond as we speak. And so we're going to go take a look at that. Apple's, I believe, coming out with a 12 billion or a 13 billion bond in the next few days or weeks. So we'll go take a look at that. So similarly, governments, countries, states, companies, all are rated for their credit. The professional credit rating agencies like the Standard & Poor, Moody's and Fitch, they look at the company, they study it carefully, and they give a credit rating. And for each bond, they give a rating to the bond. And if the rating is very high, then of course, the company has to pay lesser interest. If the rating is very low, that means the company has to pay higher interest. So along the same lines, you have high yield bonds as well from companies that are a little bit in stress, but doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad companies. It's just that they are at a cycle where they are a little stressed from one or two or many fronts, and they need this capital, and therefore they are willing to pay a little higher interest. This is generally the hierarchy, and bondholders have rights that are higher than stockholders. So if a company goes bust, then the company's assets will be sold off, and bondholders will get their money first before any money is returned to the stockholder. Now that should be obvious because the bondholder is taking a lot more risk. If the company does very well, then the stock is going to go up and the stockholders are going to benefit. However, even if the stock doubles, the bondholders don't get any of that benefit. All they get is the interest rate that was promised to them. And therefore, when it comes to liquidation or bankruptcy, bondholders will always have rights higher than stockholders. Now, even among bonds, there is seniority. So there'll be a senior bond that will be paid off first, and then there might be a hierarchy of bonds that will be paid off next if the company is going under liquidation or bankruptcy. So let's pause this here, and I want to go take a look at the Apple bond and see what we can find. Okay, so I'm on the browser here and I haven't looked at this at all. So let's go look at the Apple bond issue and see what people are saying about this. Yeah, so here it is. Today is February 17th. Tim Cook has just said something. Apple to issue $10 billion to $12 billion worth of bonds to finance share buybacks and to issue dividends. So let's take a look at MarketWatch's article on this particular issue. So Apple was leading a slate of new bond sales on Tuesday after a nearly 2-week lull, suggesting investors are still eager to lend to big blue chip companies despite concerns that a global recession could be developing. So obviously Apple's issuing about $10 to $12 billion worth of new bonds, and they're going to use that money to buy their shares. So obviously they feel that their shares are undervalued, so they want to buy that. And they also want to use some of the proceeds to give dividends, which we'll cover later. Dividends are issued to stockholders, and so they want to use this money to pay dividends. Apple has sold many bonds before. It sold $17 billion worth of bonds in 2013, which at the time ranked as the biggest corporate bond sale on record. So these firms, it says IBM, Comcast, Apple, these firms all carry investment grade, so which are triple B minus or above. Now, in the case of Apple particularly, I don't know if they've given a rating to this particular bond. Let's see if there's anything on that over here. They've not said anything here. Let's try to search on Apple bond issue rating. Let's see. Apple credit rating under Moody's. Moody's assigns AA1. So that's what Moody's assigns. And there was something else that caught my eye here. Apple's $145 billion in cash fails to win AAA debt rating. So here, okay, but that is from 2013. It did not get a AAA. But regardless, I think now the rating agencies, this news has just come out, so the rating agencies are going to look at this particular bond and they'll study Apple's current financials and then give this bond a rating. Now, Apple's previous bonds may have a different rating. This bond might be of a different rating. Each bond issuance is given a rating, and that's how the interest rates and everything are set based upon this credit rating. So hopefully you've got an idea of how the bond market works. Basically, there are government bonds, there are corporate bonds. Within government bonds, there are good governments, mediocre governments, and bad governments. So if a government like Venezuela wanted to get a bond, I'm pretty sure their interest rate is going to be somewhere in the high 30s or 40s or even more than that. During the crisis in Europe, in Greece was asked to pay, I think, like 25% interest on their bonds. So it's a wide range. It depends on the state of that government. It depends on their financial status. Similarly, corporates are the same. If Apple is getting a AA, then some other smaller company, let's say Best Buy, may not even get an investment grade. So they all look at the financials and decide what the rating is for the bond, and then consequently the interest rates are set. Now we'll be looking at all of this in detail and deep dive into fixed income in its section later. Thank you.